The unprecedented pace of disruption and uncertainty makes leadership more relevant today than ever before. It is not position or power, but your leadership skills that help you to think in unique, creative ways. When faced with a crisis, a leader is forced to think and make critical decisions. A leader who empowers a team and gives employees accountability increases the effectiveness of an organization. John Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Warren Bennis says leadership is the capacity to turn vision into reality. And Bill Gates says, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. Today, I have the honor of welcoming Rich Batchelor. Rich Batchelor is a president and chief change agent of Capillary Consulting. Rich has been successfully delivering change for over 25 years. He has consulted, coached, and educated with organizations across all parts of the globe and regularly lends his voice to many educational events, conferences, and experiences each year. He is a founding member of the Association of Change Management Professionals, ACMP, and was founding president of the Toronto chapter for 6 years. He has also founded the highly successful Toronto Change Days Conference, complementing the original Berlin Change Days Conference, and now Australasian Change Days. He has a master's in change management and is certified in project management, process improvement, facilitation, HR, coaching, counseling, and psychotherapy. He is also a certified Lego serious play facilitator and workshop designer, certified in facilitating organizations through VUCA, and an accredited emotional culture deck elephant rider. His presentation delivery is known for its passion and direct challenges to the audience. He enjoys the opportunity to disrupt traditional thinking, bring humor to the learning space, and enable curiosity to take control of the change space for everyone. Rich, welcome to this interview.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to begin by asking you, what do you think are 3 traits that a project manager or a leader should have to thrive in a disruptive economy?
Well, I'd hope there's more than 3 traits, to be totally honest with you. I think I can probably highlight 3 key, probably 3 overarching pieces. And it kind of highlights a bit of my introduction. One of the key things I think for project managers is really to be able to be curious about things, to be able to make impactful questioning and really ask things. I think when we're in all sorts of different situations that people are going through, that curiosity is important. But I also think recognizing that there's an element of self-leadership that's required as a project manager. I think that sort of self-awareness, emotional intelligence aspect is really, really important and becoming even more important, I think, for project managers. And I suppose linking the 2 together in some ways, but also separate for the success of any project at the moment, I think project managers need to recognize an element of personal health, well-being, personal resilience, self-care as well, because I think they need to recognize that they can only be at their best for other people when they're at their best for themselves. So I think looking after themselves as well. So that would kind of be my 3 things, I think, would be curiosity, self-care, and personal leadership.
Nice points: curiosity, self-awareness, and resilience. We now come to crisis response. How does a leader respond in terms of a crisis? And what are some important parts of that effective response?
Sure. You know, and obviously at the moment in time, there's a lot of this going on, I think. I think the key thing for leadership and true leaders at this time with dealing with crises is to focus on thinking before doing. I think it's very easy to be too reactive at a crisis point, and I think true leadership demonstrates that somebody is thinking before they're acting. They are reflecting on the situation before they make decisions. So I think that's a key piece. And I think also, true leaders lead people, not tasks. So therefore, it's about maintaining or even improving where possible those relationships with the people that they lead as well. I think that's a key thing with the crisis, because really when you're dealing with this sort of situation, you need to be aware that there's a lot of fallout to those people, and the role of the leader is to be that sort of guide, supporter, facilitator, advisor, mentor, all those roles that kind of go into that piece to those people as well. And I think that leading by example comes into play with that. So showing and demonstrating how to react and respond at these times.
Talking about people, a leader is in charge of a team. So how does a leader keep his team motivated and connected? And what support can he offer them during a crisis?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think you use the word team, and I always challenge people on the use of the word team. Not so much in that it's a bad word to use or anything, but for me, too often we refer to a team as just being those group of people that are working in an office together with somebody. A team can be anybody or any group of people with a common purpose that are following that leader. And I think that's where a true leader comes into play, is being able to have that group of people with a common purpose, a direction, following them to achieve something, whatever that goal may be. And I think they have a responsibility and a role to play in being available to those people for conversation, support, guidance. I often think of a leader as being a kind of like a knowledge broker for people. It's like they have knowledge, that sort of mentoring type of activity that kicks in. And I think their role is usually to demonstrate the experience or competency or capacity of their previous engagements, activities for the benefit of that team that they're leading. I also think there's a flip side, that they have to be able to recognize the vulnerability and challenges of the individuals on the team as well. And I think when having a conversation with people, whoever the person may be on the team, maybe one-to-one, maybe one-to-many, I think that they have a responsibility to be listening for not just what is being said, but how it's being said to them, because that can often be an indicator of underlying challenges that the person is going through. Because we have to recognize that, in this time of crisis, challenge, etc., that's going on, it's okay to not be okay about it. Doesn't mean that you stop, doesn't mean you close down, but a leader's role is to keep that motivational aspect going for those individuals and help them to understand why they do what they do, how they do what they do, and give them the guidance and support that's needed for that.
Yeah, you brought a good point about humility, about accepting the situation and being vulnerable or humble about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that sort of humility and humbleness is a true character of high-performing leaders, actually, because it's that, I often have a conversation with somebody that says, I know a good leader when I know a leader that's willing to say, I don't know. Because if somebody who says, I don't know about something and will turn to somebody else, is recognizing that even though they might have a lot of experience in something, they can't know everything about everything. So willingness to say that, I think, and that humbleness or humility. And it's courageous for many leaders to actually be in that position of vulnerability, because there's an expectation that they should know everything. They should be there. They should do it, doing that.
If you look back at your career, What is one of the biggest challenges you have faced as a project manager or as a leader?
I think, you know, I say I've been doing this for a few years, so I've had a few challenges along the way. But maybe I would say the most common challenge that I have, and I can talk particularly to one more extreme element of that, I think that kind of kicked in for me as an example. But when you're leading projects, trying to deliver whatever it is, you need to have high quality sponsorship within the organization that needs that. And one of my biggest challenges has been what I would refer to as dysfunctional sponsorship, where you have a person that has been parachuted into a sponsor role who doesn't maybe have awareness of responsibilities of what they are sponsoring. But more often than not, my biggest challenge is that they don't actually know what their role is as a sponsor. They kind of have this conflict between, well, maybe I need to micromanage the project as well. Or the alternative conflict is, well, I'll just be totally hands off and only talk to me if you ever get desperate. And you never see them from weeks to weeks and that type of stuff. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And one particular complex program of projects that I was involved with, my biggest challenge I had was where there were effectively 3 sponsors that were in play here. And I spent as much time facilitating the conversation between the 3 sponsors so that they were on the same page as I did myself, trying to get the work done in line with their direction. And it was almost that kind of managing up as well as managing down aspect that was coming in at the same time. Fortunately, we managed to navigate it through and get somewhere. But I would say the reason it was most challenging for me was because of the lack of leadership support, I suppose we could say, that I had from that sponsor, but also the responsibility that was effectively dumped on myself. And I use the word dumped, not delegated, even though that's often the pretend word that's used instead. And I would say that was a real challenge, because it meant that I felt a little bit cast astray, cast out sort of into like, just, well, okay, it's all on me now, I guess. And that's kind of uncomfortable for some people to deal with it. This is a few years back in my career, and I think nowadays I'd be a lot more comfortable because I've done this a lot more. But when you're in your sort of first 6 to 8 years of a career, you kind of don't expect these things to just be thrown down on you and say, go on, make it happen. And by the way, these people are supposed to be supporting you. Well, they're kind of more interested in arguing between themselves who's in charge rather than actually helping you do things. So that's a real challenge piece, I think, that comes in. And I see this as being a challenge that is still prevalent, unfortunately, in that sort of sponsorship being one of the most frequent weak spots in successful delivery.
Today, we have moved from a co-localized, localized setting, face-to-face meetings, to Zoom, Skype, then you have Slack, WhatsApp, and whatnot. So how do you lead effectively in a virtual workplace?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey this year, with seeing all the virtual space coming into play, and the difference in this. It's kind of strange for me, because on a personal level, I've been doing virtual interaction and delivery since like the mid 2000s. It wasn't like a sudden thing that kicked in for me now. But for me, it was a challenge, recognizing that just because I was so experienced in doing this, not everybody else was at the same level, and having to work with people and do that. And I think this is where the role of leading, virtual, remote, multi-channel, interactive situations comes into play, in terms of recognizing different levels of capacity and capability in all of these. Um, and I think some of the stuff that I've been involved with over the last sort of 4 or 5 months, particularly, has highlighted the level of people who are nervous about doing these things, apprehensive, and almost afraid to show themselves up if they press the wrong button or something happens and it's like, oh my God, can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you see what I've got on my screen? Can you? And then there's like this panic of like, can you really see what I've got on my screen? And people go through all of these things, and there's some wonderful videos about things that have kind of gone a bit messy with people and things like that. But I think we talk, we joke and everything, but I think it's quite serious for a lot of people actually getting their head around the responsibility of doing things virtually. I think for me, my role in, and I suppose it's difficult for me because like any meeting, engagement, event, activity that I do virtually, I see my role not necessarily as leader, but as facilitator. And I think it's about facilitating the conversation and facilitating the engagement levels. I do think that there are a number of techniques that you need to bring into the equation. I think, for instance, I often have a conversation with people where I've maybe got like, 8, 9 more, whatever, I'm even teaching virtually, and that's a whole scenario of like classes of 30 to 40 plus people, in a virtual environment. But it's recognizing with people that you don't have to perform in a certain way that involves everybody's face square onto the screen all the time, 100%. When you're in a normal physical discussion, you look away occasionally, you look down, you make notes, you do whatever you're doing. You don't have this kind of transfixed piece to the screen. So I'm not going to have a problem if you look away for a second or two. I actually actively encourage to rest your eyes and that whole sort of, piece that comes in of like staring at the screen for so long. So I think that's really important. And I think, that goes into, also being respective of people's tolerance levels of focus in a virtual environment, and doing things a lot sort of short, sharp, small pieces of activity rather than trying to do such long things. Or if you are going to do a long thing, I've delivered like whole day workshops and things like this virtually, is making sure you have formulated proper breaks into the equation for that day. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they kind of think they could just, replicate everything from a physical to a virtual without restructuring and putting new things in and that sort of stuff. So I try and do things that keep people engaged online. We have conversations, trying to use the online tools that are available. But also recognizing that, just because I want to have a conversation with somebody, it doesn't mean that we have to jump onto a Zoom call straight away. Maybe there are other ways that we can have conversations that don't require that. And I think the early days of this particular crisis, everybody was jumping on a Zoom call at every moment because they wanted to see everybody all the time. And I think now people are starting to recognize that maybe you can just Slack them a message and that's it, you're done. Or maybe you just sort of, don't need to do anything more than a phone call, that old school traditional phone call or WhatsApp call or whatever. It's that's all that's needed, and we have to build that into the equation. So I think that's why I also encourage people that I'm involved with in any sort of teamwork in parts of teams, and I've got my hands in lots of different teams that I'm involved with. When I'm facilitating that engagement, I always ask the people to think about the tools or the methods they're going to use and make sure they've considered all of them, and really which is going to be the most effective for the message, not necessarily which one do they think everybody expects them to use, and have that kind of variance in that sort of thought process, because I think that helps. And then just as a final piece on this stuff about virtual facilitation, virtual engagement type activity, is having a moment of check-in and check-out with any sort of meeting or session that you have. Because I think in a physical environment, you have that sort of casual conversation as you're settling into the meeting, and that's kind of missing. So I think that's something else I found very, very important, is to just have that sort of virtual check-in of like, okay, 10, 15 seconds per person. Doesn't need to be a huge thing, just to say, how's it going today? Anything you want to share today, that type of stuff, just so that they have that moment of like, okay, I'm here, I'm present, and I can be authentic today in this conversation. So
yeah, you talked about the tools and maybe the frequency, how often we use, and if the people around there are comfortable using whatever tools. And the additional thing would be the timing, different time zones. So is it comfortable to call at this time?
Oh, well, absolutely. And actually, that's a good point you mentioned about the time zones, actually, because it's actually a kind of like a double-edged sword, I think, in some ways with that, because I think you do tend to be considerate, and I've always tried to be considerate of time zones. But I think there's also an aspect of maybe people are working from home constantly with doing this, is they kind of forget normal working hours, and they end up doing whenever they need to do whatever they need to do. And if that ends up being a meeting at 9 p.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever it is, they kind of make it work somehow. And I think we possibly need to have a little bit more consideration on some of that stuff to allow people that space that's outside of the working times. Because I think I have noticed that coming in with some of the conversations I've had, is people forget about time zones and just kind of say, oh, well, you know, you're only at home, you can make it work, aren't you? It's like, well, sure.
Many companies were taken by surprise at the beginning of this year when the COVID-19 pandemic struck. So how do you actually preempt such a risk and factor it into your risk management plan?
Yeah. Wow. I don't know. Can you? Is it possible? I think it's interesting for me because there's been a few things that have been highlighted for me with the COVID situation around risk management, business continuity type aspects, you know, all of that sort of space. And I think organizations have fallen into quite a lazy approach in the past, because nobody's ever expected to have to implement that business continuity plan or that, you know, so it's never really been given the space that it deserves around a conversation table, around a leadership team meeting, around whatever it may be. So I think that's been kind of interesting. So I think for me, it's making me and many people I'm involved with recognize that all of those, you know, plans and what ifs, maybe plans, maybe need to be easily accessible, not just held by one person and you don't know who that one person is in an organization, and need to be reviewed regularly, kept up to date, you know, all of that sort of stuff, you know, very practical pieces of stuff and everything like that, because you never know when you might need them. Which is kind of like on the practical side of, you know, being prepared for the future. I think in a more sort of behavioral leadership style characteristics, that sort of stuff, the biggest thing for me, and it's interesting because I was very tempted to include it in the response to the first question about the qualities for project manager, but it is this idea of generally being agile, being nimble, being flexible, that being agile in your mindset and accepting that not everything is stable, not everything is controlled. I've been very fortunate in a lot of ways that I've been doing a lot of work in the VUCA space, VUCA being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. as an acronym. And for me, one of the key ways of navigating that sort of disruptive situation like we've been dealing with this year is actually having people with a mindset of agility, so that they don't worry about the unexpected coming their way. They actually look at it as an opportunity rather than as a closing down piece, so that opportunity to reposition, rework, redefine, you know. I think the year of the word of the year, sorry, has been pivot, because if everybody's pivoting this year for things, and it's like it's kind of funny in that, but to me that's really about everybody's having to embrace agility, and I think that is a key piece. You know, and then I think, you know, some of those other qualities I mentioned earlier on, around the sort of curiosity, resilience, self-leadership piece, really show, you know, ability to deal with crises, the unexpected, the disruption as it might appear in the future. I also think as well that one of the unspoken pieces has been financial challenges for organizations and businesses with all of this, because it makes you realize how many organizations have single or minimal revenue streams. It's like they're totally dependent on one source of income, and when that source of income is, you know, dropped by 95% or even removed completely, it makes that organization extremely vulnerable. And I think financially, it makes me realize that organizations need to have multiple revenue streams that they have available to them, so that if something affects one of them, they've still got others to keep the business running, because so many people have felt very challenged this year on a financial status, you know, and we've all had that because, you know, various situations, and so many people furloughed, and so many, you know, all this stuff going on. But I think it's really made me realize that a lot of organizations need to have some sort of diversification in their revenue streams to be supportive for the future. And I think that's going to probably kick in with a few organizations going on, as they've kind of had their fingers burnt a little bit with this and want to actually, you know, okay, let's not do that again. Let's not go through that challenge again. Let's be ready should anything happen in the future. So so that's, yeah, that's probably where I would go with that. And then there's sort of general stuff as well I would recommend about having that sort of the agile stuff kicking in into terms of flexible organizational structures and things like that, you know, not be too rigid in your hierarchy and your process flows and things like that as well, I think is going to be really important.
What do you see as the future for project managers?
That's a bit of a loaded question. It's like, what's the future? Unfortunately, my crystal ball isn't working today, so I'll have to try and work on my own instincts and stuff like that. I think there's a huge range of opportunities coming up for project managers. I think the future, I suppose for me, I think there's going to be a diversification of role responsibilities for project managers, I think, going forward. I think we're starting to see that now, where we start to see project management as a dedicated activity work, but also a number of people who use project management skills as part of a bigger role or responsibility in operations or product management or whatever it may be. And I think going forward, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for project managers to diversify into other areas. Probably not every area, but, you know, a lot of areas in terms of, I could see, you know, research and innovation, product development, more general operations and functional delivery type aspects, that side of stuff, where they have very, very transferable skills that can enable those areas to be performing well. I think in terms of what one might call more traditional project management sort of solo roles or whatever, I think there's going to be an expectation to demonstrate project leadership over project management a lot more. I think the ability to lead teams as a project manager rather than just lead tasks is going to come in much more important. And that's going to mean a constant awareness of how to best engage, motivate, develop, guide, support, etc. individuals. So I think those people skill sides are going to come in a lot more. I see additional roles coming to the fore that have kind of always been there, but not so well flagged in terms of project coordinators, project financial managers, that sort of stuff to support. And you may see some project managers going into more of that sort of focus, I think, going forward. And then, you know, to go back to my favorite word of the agile word as well, I think the actual delivery approaches are moving and will continue to move towards much more agile delivery of projects and much less cascade waterfall traditional stuff. I think there'll always be a place for the cascade traditional stuff, but I think I see that moving as a sort of piece that's coming in, so that, you know, 20 years ago, you know, agile had a very niche market space and that was it. Whereas now I think the skill sets of that are being carried over, and I see project managers being expected to deliver not just in agile environments, but also with that kind of agile mindset and practices and pieces like that. And I think that's going to come in much more, whichever approach they use within that agile space as well, because we know there's a multiple of different sort of models and approaches in that stuff and everything. But I think that's going to be a key piece going forward. And then I also think, you know, a lot of my background, a lot of my experience has been in the change management space as well. And that's my sort of baby space, shall we say, or whatever you want to call it. And I see roles for project managers to enhance the change management space, find opportunities for collaborative partnership space within change management. And I think that's going to play a lot more into project managers being recognized for doing programmatic and portfolio management rather than just your traditional one single piece, because they're going to be expected to, you know, have a multiplicity of plates spinning. And then the way the strategic change piece comes into that, I think there's going to be a piece for that. So it's a very broad base, I think, of expansion coming in for the PM community, which is exciting in some ways, because I think PMs, and you know, and I teach a number of PM classes at colleges and stuff like that, and involved with things like that, and I have conversations with, you know, new to the field type people, and they're like, oh, so what can I do with this stuff? And I think it's like it shows you've got a very broad range of opportunities that you can go into. The difficulty I think that's going to come from all of this is how people decide what's best for them rather than just going for what they can do. I think a lot of us historically have done jobs, irrespective of what the job is, that we can do to pay the bills, to keep the roof over our head, etc., etc. And I think the challenge is going to be whether there are enough roles and positions in each of those different areas to fit the needs and wants of people to move into that space, or are we still going to be struggling to keep people motivated to develop in those spaces? So, yeah, not sure, but we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to be, you know, the crisis we've had this year as well may be a good sort of restart button moment for looking at some of these things going forward for people and organizations.
We come to the final question. Do you have any words of advice for youngsters, the millennials who wish to take up a career in project management?
Yeah, lots of stuff actually I could probably share. I think So I think there's a range of things that I think about, and I just mentioned in my last response about working with youngsters that are coming through the space and things like that. I think my advice pieces are around making sure that they know what they're getting into. I think some people think that project management is all about writing Gantt charts, and that's all there is. It's how do I get the nice, prettiest Gantt chart to go up on a screen or something, and realizing there's a little bit more that goes on than just doing that sort of side of things. So I think making sure that they're aware of all the aspects of the stuff. So I would say, anybody interested in project management this field is to make sure they do the research, find people who are in the space and talk to them and ask them what do they do and what activities, what's a typical day in the life of type scenarios. I also think it's important for younger generations to recognize that there is a development pathway. They're not going to come in and within 6 months be managing $200 million projects, that there's going to be an expectation to grow into that capacity. And typically those size projects don't have one person managing them. They often have a whole team of people. So I think that kind of realism piece needs to be talked about, which again is, worth having that stuff. I think look into some of the qualification pieces that are out there. There are so many different ways you can get certified, qualified, educated in whatever appeals to you. I think, my recommendation is always don't just go to whatever comes up first for you, but go to whatever appeals to you first, because if something appeals to you, you'll put time and effort into it. It won't feel like a chore when you're actually doing that education piece. So whether it's a college course, whether it's getting your PMP certification, or maybe you just go for a CAPM certification first and then build to your PMP. There's all sorts of stuff around the sort of agile stuff that you can do. So work out what works best for you in terms of a qualification. And then I think, there's nothing beats some hands-on experience, or seeing real practical application of the skill set. So I would always say to any youngsters is find opportunities to try and get your hands dirty in a space somewhere. So whether that's some sort of internship, whether it's just maybe shadowing somebody who's willing to mentor you, join some of the mentorship schemes that are floating around for a lot of the PMI chapters have mentorship schemes that people can join and be part of. They're really beneficial for people to learn from. But maybe it's just using LinkedIn as an opportunity to reach out to somebody that you want to kind of connect with and learn from. That's also another opportunity, I think. And I think recognize that if you want to get into a career in project management, you want to get into a career of delivering change, delivering new things, delivering impactful things. You want to make a difference. And I think recognizing that the career space allows you to make a difference is something that you have to be prepared for. So yeah, that would be kind of my final comments, is recognizing the make a difference piece there on that stuff for people, and make sure that your heart is also in this, not just your head.
Thank you so much, Rich, for sharing your knowledge, ideas, and experience on all those questions. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure those listening to this video will benefit from it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.